I work at Grounded Solutions Network, and our mission is to build strong communities from the ground up. And we do that in a number of different ways. We have a lot of field building and trainings, both in person and online, trainings like this one. And we also provide technical assistance and have other resources and benefits for our members on everything from establishing a CLT to creating strong local policy. So I just want to open up by talking a little bit about why we're here today. And we're really here to talk about the difference between what families in this area can afford to buy and the market value of homes. And what we're calling that is the affordability gap. So we're all trying to address this basic issue of the growing affordability gap between what folks can purchase on their own in the open market and what's actually available to them. And community land trusts seek to help to bridge this gap by acquiring, owning, and stewarding land so that it's permanently affordable for the common good. And they can acquire land in a number of different ways, purchasing land on the open market, receiving land donations, participating with different city agencies like land banks and other entities to purchase land at a discounted rate. But the key element here is that no matter what, once the land is acquired, it remains permanently in perpetuity within that CLT's portfolio, and it is never sold outside of the portfolio. And I'll explain what that means in a little bit. So as a CLT acquires land, they think about the end purpose of each parcel. And so if this were just the open market, we might think what's the highest and best use of a land, and that might translate to, and how much money can we get for it? And CLTs are thinking about this a little bit differently. They're asking, what is our community's greatest need? And they pursue those opportunities within reason, of course. And so in addition to providing affordable homeownership opportunities to residents, CLTs have also used land to provide affordable single or multifamily rental opportunities, mixed income, and other commercial properties. All of that is possible within a CLT, but of course today we're really going to be focusing primarily on affordable housing. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about the CLT structure. So it's generally a nonprofit organization with a defined service area. And then my favorite piece is the tripartite board. I think this is really the crux of what makes CLTs so special. So the tripartite board is made up of 3/3, as you might imagine, in tripartite. The first being leaseholders, so folks who are living on or using CLT land. The second third is community members, so folks from the surrounding area who aren't necessarily living on the CLT land. And the third is made up of technical experts, funders, and other stakeholders of the organization. And so membership is clearly open to anyone within the surrounding community, and it's not just those who are living on the land trust land who have a stake in what happens within that community. And so that's part of why I get really excited to talk about the tripartite board, because it truly is an example of communities really controlling the organization that affects their own home and their own local community, because community members, as you can see from the 2/3, have a majority of the votes on all major decisions. And so CLTs use a dual ownership model. As you may have heard me say at one point, folks who lease the land. The way that the dual ownership model works is to secure the property for the common good and to ensure its ongoing affordability beyond the ownership of the existing homeowner. So in this dual ownership structure, as you can see in the image, the individual, most frequently a low-income home buyer in this case, will purchase and own just the improvements, or the home in this case, and the community land trust will own the land underneath the home. And what connects the two is a 99-year ground lease that ties the improvements and the land together. So the ground lease does a couple of really critical things. First of all, it outlines the rights and the responsibilities of the homeowner and the rights and responsibilities of the community land trust. Second, it establishes use restrictions, things like requiring the homeowner to use the property as their primary residence so that it's actually serving the need that we're seeking to meet. And then finally, it establishes affordability restrictions for future homeowners. Because of all of these restrictions, what this creates for us is perpetual affordability. So these perpetual affordability restrictions are really, in my opinion, what sets CLTs apart from other affordable housing models. So they not only ensure that the first occupant is someone who really can benefit from the affordability of the property, but that all future occupants can benefit as well. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, but I'll add the caveat is this does not mean that if I'm a homeowner that my future descendants cannot inherit the home, or that there will be specific restrictions on their income. And we can get into the weeds a little bit after the session if you're curious about that, but we're really talking perpetual affordability in terms of home sales in this specific case. Yeah?
Will you, and you may be getting to this later, but will you mention about how it affects tax base? Do these properties, they pay taxes for the property, and are they assessed in the same ways that the surrounding areas? So,
yeah.
So it's continuing providing resources for the public sector as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was about how these homes are taxed specifically. Within the state of Minnesota, the homes are taxed in this way, not in this way. So the taxes are exactly the same. So the land and the home together, the property is taxed at once. Okay, so back to perpetual affordability. So the way that this is established is one, removing the land and the home from the speculative market. And then that home can be resold over and over again using resale restrictions. And again, all of this is outlined in the ground lease in the initial agreement so that it's not a surprise down the line to the homeowner, and there's nothing new for either party. So the CLT will use maybe a public subsidy to lower the initial price of the home to a level that's affordable to the first homeowner. And they can do this in a number of different ways. They can subsidize the cost of acquiring the property, of constructing the property, or they can use subsidies to help a home buyer purchase an existing home. But no matter how it's done, the house is removed from the market, and therefore it can be resold over and over again, with the ground lease outlining how the resale will work, the maximum sale price, and other eligibility factors for a subsequent buyer. And so again, by making the house perpetually affordable, we're seeking to address the issue of the growing affordability gap, right? So as home prices are growing over time, we would need a larger and larger subsidy each year if, in order to keep someone in that property that's within the portfolio. But by tying our subsidy to the house directly and removing it from the market, we only need a one-time investment of that subsidy in order to keep the house affordable in perpetuity, which is a pretty neat thing, especially when you think about the sustainability of affordable housing options. There's two basic ways to think about how we make housing affordable and filling that gap between affordability and the market value. So in the first example up here, and this is something that I think we see a little bit more traditionally outside of the CLT model, the money can flow to a family in the form of a grant, a forgivable loan, a deferred loan, and then it reduces their monthly payment for the mortgage, which if you think about it is really affordable financing. And it's not affordable housing. It's making the purchase of that home more affordable for that individual family. Give a subsidy to one family, you're helping one family. And if there's an unlimited supply of subsidies, great, make that funding available, help that family out. But knowing that perhaps we're a little bit more economically tied, the money can be given instead in the form of a grant or a forgivable loan to the CLT. And then they're permanently investing it in the home so that instead of giving one subsidy to one family, every single family that might live in that home is served by that subsidy again and again for generations, and the impact of those dollars are going a little bit farther, a bit farther. And so then the question we often hear is, well, how do you seek that fair balance between individual wealth creation and the benefit of a community being able to have a large housing stock of affordable homes? And I think the CLT model really gets at this really well because the homeowners are still gaining equity within their property. They still have the security that comes, as Darian was mentioning earlier, with having a secure and stable home environment. And so maybe there isn't as much individual wealth creation as if we did this model, right, where the subsidy is yours, congratulations, you have the home, we're asking for nothing in return. But in the end, the community at large is benefiting in a greater way than would be possible if we were just focusing on individual wealth creation of a single family. And so the way we do this, as I mentioned briefly, is subsidy retention. And so perpetual affordability can be created by subsidy retention where all of the subsidy is retained and recycled within the same house or property. And so the goal here, as you can see with the green line is to never need to keep up with the market, to never need a new infusion of subsidy, which might grow over time as that affordability gap increases. So instead, we're really just striving to keep up with what's affordable for families rather than trying to tie ourselves to the market. And so in this way, homeowners, again, still have equity in the home and the opportunity for wealth creation over time. Maybe not as dramatically as if they were on the market, but the house is kept within the same portfolio of affordable units that are, again, generation after generation. And you might hear me say that 10 times, but it's, I think, the exciting and important part of this is that in perpetuity, it will stay affordable if we link it to not the market price, but the affordable price. And so with that comes perpetual responsibility. If we're holding on to this home for generations and generations, what's the role of the CLT in all of this? So there's 3 different ways that the oversight and support, which we would call stewardship of the homes, might be carried out by community land trusts. So the first thing to think about is the structures of the homes themselves. The CLTs are responsible for stewarding homes. So if the home's to remain affordable, it of course needs to remain in good condition. And so CLTs will do things like make sure that the home is adequately insured, approve all substantial renovations and additions. They can also educate homeowners about preventative maintenance, encourage them to make capital improvements on the property, and also help homeowners through renovations to prevent contractor fraud, especially for first-time homeowners. The next thing to think about, in addition to the land, is the homeowners themselves. So the CLTs will also steward homeowners over time, and they'll do this to support the homeowner's ability to actually realize wealth creation, so that they're not just attaining home ownership, but they're setting themselves up to be in a stable place to retain the home over time. And so CLTs might do things like homebuyer counseling before purchase, reviewing all mortgage and finance documents, particularly refinance documents, to prevent any predatory lending. And in some cases, CLTs will even offer post-purchase counseling, foreclosure prevention, additional services to really help bolster the homeowners who need the extra support. And so I mentioned the stewardship of the home, the stewardship of the homeowners, and then of course there's stewardship of the public funds in the form of the subsidy that's helped to make the home affordable in the first place. So every CLT is really making a promise to the community that it will serve generation after generation, and the key to that success is resale restrictions. And so to make good on this promise, CLTs will oversee every element of resale, including calculating the formula price for future sale of the house, income certifying the next home buyer, and so on, to make sure that the subsidy is really being well used by the community. And there's a powerful resource called the Homekeeper National Data Hub that we at Grounded Solutions use that helps us to see in real time how we're performing as a sector to keep people in their homes and maintain affordability. And it's an app that's designed by and for people who manage affordable home ownership programs, where we can roll up national data to answer questions. I heard someone ask something under their breath about foreclosure, which I'll get to in a minute. But it helps us, yeah. Got those teacher skills still, yeah. But it helps us to answer questions about the sector. And I'll give you a brief preview. You're going to like the answer I have about foreclosures. So data has shown overall that stewardship is really transformative in this regard in terms of, again, maintaining the commitment to the community through the stewardship of the subsidy, the home, and also the homeowner. Okay, so how do we make this work sustainably? So each CLT has a perpetual responsibility, again, generation after generation. And we know that with an increased need, that comes with an increased need to focus on sustainability of the CLT itself, right? We want to set the homeowners up for success, but we want the CLT to be able to be a successful running organization in order to support and steward for generations to come. And so this can be done through donations, through operating grants. If the CLT is developing their own homes, they might collect developer fees to fund ongoing operations. And in addition, most will collect maybe a monthly lease fee, fees at resale, and some even go as far as to serve as their own real estate agents, where they can collect the realty fees while also charging that to their clients at a reduced rate versus what they would get from an external realtor. And so CLTs are really having to think both inside and outside the box in order to get themselves to sustainability, to make sure that they're really upholding that forever commitment. And so here are some sources of CLT subsidies and units. Again, just as a teaser that there's more ways than one in order to make the subsidy and the units available to the community. So what you're seeing here is that before the foreclosure crisis, it was shown that only 47% of first-time low-income and minority home buyers retained homeownership for 5 years. However, over 90% of CLT homeowners are able to retain home ownership for at least 5 years. And research has, of course, shown that the longer the duration of tenure in a home, this is the most critical factor in terms of building wealth over time. So, very proud of these numbers. So, CLTs in action. In the communities they serve, CLTs can do more than just home ownership or housing, as I mentioned. The application of the model can be based on community need in ways that are adaptable and responsive to need or maybe a changing market. So it might include something like urban agriculture, commercial use, land preservation, whatever the needs are of the community. Of course, today we're really thinking about housing, but just worth noting that it doesn't have to be exclusive to what you build within your community. Okay, so now this is the fun part for me, hopefully the fun part for you too. We're gonna play a little game called Fact or Fiction to check to see if we're all on the same page about what a CLT is and isn't. Okay, first fact, community land trust homeowners build wealth. Fact or fiction? Fact, good job. Give yourself a little pat on the back. Does anyone want to tell us why they chose this side of the room?
Because you told us.
Because I said the first fact instead of saying the first fact versus fiction? Or because I told you in the presentation? Okay, okay.
Just not as fast as the market, but they do build wealth.
Okay, so they are building wealth, but not as fast as they would in the market. Great, yeah.
So one of the things I think, it's often said that community land trusts don't build wealth. And one of the challenges, and I encourage people to think about home ownership in a different light, because we're always so concerned about what the check is when we go to sell. And if the down market taught us nothing, that home ownership is no longer guaranteed to be some kind of a profit. So are we more beneficial hoping that in 10 years or 7 years that there's a 6-figure check? Or do we create a scenario where someone is paying, maybe not significantly less, but they're paying closer to 30% of their income on a monthly basis, and now they have $200 to $300 perhaps or more per month. And that's where I think about wealth building, is on the day-to-day decisions and on the month-to-month, and less about, I sell in 20 years and I'm going to get that check. Because that, I think, is no longer a reality, but we still are hanging on to that home ownership.
I'm going to do the world's tiniest summary of what Stacey just shared for those who are watching later and might need the mic. The idea that she's talking about here is that if we reorient ourselves a little bit and don't think about home ownership as what's the check going to be in 20 years when I sell, but instead how can home ownership create some stability for me so that I have more expendable income to save, to do the things that I need in order to further myself and my family's well-being, that's really a different target. And when we think about the unpredictability of the housing market, it's maybe a smarter way to operate. So what this is showing here is the benefit of, we're not just comparing, well, how much money, how much equity am I gaining by purchasing a CLT home versus by purchasing a home in the fair market, open market, when perhaps this family wouldn't have been able to purchase a home. So another way to think about it is in comparison to renting, right? How much am I able to gain wealth and create wealth? Great. And the numbers are pretty awesome here too in terms of how many home buyers still own after 5 years within CLTs. Okay, next, fact or fiction. Community land trusts serve the same purpose as land banks. Let's hear from someone on this side of the room. What are you thinking?
I don't know what land banks, their purpose is.
Fair.
Why I said, what the heck, I'll stay in.
Okay, so we're not sure what land banks are, so might as well stay where you are. What are you thinking in the middle?
Because land banks do serve it in a partially way, so
Okay.
it could be either side, so I'm agnostic here.
Yeah, we're agnostic because maybe land banks can serve. And then over here on the fiction side.
I thought banking was like holding it.
Okay. So land banking might be holding it more. So it is fiction. And here's why. So the purpose of land banking is really to hold on to vacant, abandoned, tax delinquent properties and turning them into productive use. Whereas for a land trust, it's to have community control of land and assets, including permanently affordable housing. The structure is a little bit different. A land bank is typically a public entity, where a CLT is a membership-based nonprofit led by the community. One thing that I will say that there's really great opportunity for collaboration between land banks and land trusts. If you think about land banks on a very basic level of we're grabbing these properties, we're hoping to disperse them and put them into good use again. We've got some folks with some land and some properties, and some folks at land trusts who are looking for some land and some properties. So there's a great example, Buffalo, New York, in the Fruit Belt district, where the land bank offers up property where the CLT has the first right of refusal, so that all of the land bank homes have the chance to be moved into the CLT if they can afford to or choose to purchase that home. But they are separate entities, as mentioned here on the slide. There are exceptions within Minnesota that some nonprofits are publicly run, some CLTs are publicly run, and some land banks are more nonprofit structure. Okay, next statement. Community land trust homes typically serve multiple families with one round of subsidy. Fact or fiction? Okay, fact. Someone over here want to say why they chose fact.
If the initial subsidy goes to buy down the cost of the property or the land or the home on it, that's going to benefit any future owners in that they'll inherit a decreased value that they have to pay for.
Great, yep, exactly. That the subsidy stays with the home, and the next round of buyer will be able to afford the home at a similar affordable rate. And again, this just goes back to the idea of if we have an effective pricing policy and well-designed resale formula for future homeowners, then we're able to not have to resubsidize the same unit. CLTs always develop their own homes. It is indeed fiction. So if you remember this slide, units can come into the CLT in different ways. So some programs might use them, might develop their own units. They might provide the land and have a partner build. They might have units transferred from an inclusionary zoning or other developer required build. They could operate a buyer-driven program where the buyer selects the property and then the CLT provides a subsidy. HRAs can fund or undertake development projects, et cetera, et cetera. So CLTs are not always developing new properties in order to bring them within the portfolio.
I want to talk about the importance of supporting lasting affordability and then how we can go about doing that. This slide kind of touches on a lot of themes that Lauren has already hit. The data for this is drawn from the Homekeeper app that we put together that lets community land trusts and others really track all the data they need to manage properties for the long term. So we've got really reliable data about about properties and terms of affordability and that kind of thing. The bar chart there on your left shows the difference between if we took all the CLT homes in our database and looked at what they were priced at market rate, they would be affordable to folks at about that 71% AMI level. But because they are subject to the affordability restrictions that CLTs put on them, they actually reach much deeper into the market. So on average, they're hitting about that 54-55% affordability range. So these are folks at 50% AMI getting into homes. So one of the reasons we need to support CLTs, they make homes more affordable. Another reason we need to support CLTs is the stability that they bring. And what this other chart shows, again, pulling our data, so this is what's actually happening on the ground with over 4,300 units. Out of those 4,300 units, only 59 have ever been seriously delinquent in their housing, in their payments. And of those 59, 51 got intervention from their program. So the program swept in to try to support them. Those interventions, 45 of those interventions were actually successful. So they managed to get them out of those delinquency situations. And so we've only ever had 40 in foreclosure in this study. So it really strongly delivers stability for the community. So that's why that community land trusts, from a public policy perspective, are a community asset that we need to arrange our policies to support. So we did some research. We talked to dozens of CLT leaders and other housing industry leaders around the country to say, what are sort of the key factors you need to have in place to make CLTs successful? And what we heard back wasn't really, earth-shaking. It was kind of the basics. We need to make sure that we've got, we need to increase the resources in general available for affordable housing because CLTs draw on all of those resources. But it also helps to prioritize lasting affordability in those programs because because you are imposing this restriction for the long term, if you don't somehow prioritize that lasting affordability, folks aren't going to be able to choose it. It'll be cheaper, it'll be more advantageous to some to say, well, I only want the restriction that's going to stay for 5 years and then go away. So we need to prioritize lasting affordability. We need some consistency and predictability in resource allocation because CLTs need to be able to plan kind of a growth arc and the ability to draw on resources year after year so that they can continue to do their developing. And it's important to think about, all of these deals, these development deals require a lot of different funding layers, a lot of coordination from different programs. So you need to be able to think about how these work together and where they may conflict or put CLTs at a disadvantage. And kind of a general push toward creating a more positive development climate, making it easier, especially for affordable housing to get approved in communities. And the good news, we're doing that already in the Twin Cities region. There's a lot of examples of these kinds of policies in place in different spots. At the state level, man, I can't tell you how much I admire your impact fund from Minnesota Housing. Just the fact that it comes, you've got a steady flow of allocations to it. It does prioritize lasting affordability in some of the programs. You've got some of that is bond funded through your housing infrastructure bonds, and those HIB bonds mostly go to multifamily, but when they go to single family, they have to go to CLTs. They have to go to lasting affordability. So you've got a lot in place at the state level. They've developed mortgage products that actually work with CLTs, and that's often hard to do. So you've got that available. The local level, you do have some housing trust funds that are prioritizing lasting affordability. Hennepin County does that. You've got local communities using their HRA levies or using their CDBG and home dollars to actually help CLTs bridge that, either the affordability gap or the development gap. You've got regulatory reforms. I think the whole country was stunned when Minneapolis came along and said, yeah, we're going to get rid of this whole single-family zoning concept and upzone most of the city. You've got Minneapolis and others really looking at how do we prioritize lasting affordability in our housing program. So there are lots of different ways in different spots in the region that you're doing this. And I don't even have on here the wealth, the richness of your community land trust sort of environment. You've got so many, like almost a half dozen CLTs in the region. Again, we've got a lot there, but the coverage is spotty, as Tara was saying. There's a lot of opportunity to learn from each other and kind of explode this into broader coverage. But I think you're very well suited to kind of move forward on this.
Has any place used the land trust model to put public housing into a land trust? Has that ever been attempted or discussed as a solution?
It is a great question. Oh, yeah. So the question is, have folks moved public housing into a community land trust in history? I don't know of that, but there are others in our group who might be able to get the answer to that. So I don't think there is a reason it couldn't happen. A lot of public housing has been moving through the Hope 6 process that kind of privatizes a lot of that. So there is, but there's. Yeah, so if we're worried about the vulnerability, putting in a community land trust would be a good move on that.
Okay, so quickly in sum, how do you learn more? I just want to highlight these few resources. You can check out our website, groundedsolutions.org. We have a resource library. We have upcoming training events. I'm actually very excited about this. Starting in March, we will have an online training institute where we'll have different courses that we typically offer in person that are available to take online with some of our best practitioners. We also have a City CLT Partnership resource, which is available online, and you can also follow up with the Minnesota Community Land Trust Coalition for more info.